I think that's what entrepreneurs do, right? Great entrepreneurs find a need in the marketplace. They find something that's being underserved or not served and create that solution. And that's what my business partner and I did back in 1994. It was really our genesis into business in that part of the world.
All right, before we get into this episode, I want you to go to the Kronos Forge on School. It's a community that I built. It's built around how I live, train, how I build businesses, how I survive terrible outcomes and good outcomes. The kind of people I think will be in this community you should actually want to be around. They're going to help you level up in life. Too many men are trying to do all this stuff alone. There's no accountability. You got no feedback. And if you do, it's some sort of loop, everybody commiserating together. That's exactly why I built the Kronos Forge on School. Inside, we're going to talk about business, health, mindset, discipline, what it means to be a man, relationships, responsibility, the reality of trying to build a successful life without destroying yourself in the process. It's free to join. It's on School. The link is in the show notes. Go check it out. All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Kronos Group podcast. I am your host, Jerry Brazee, and I have a great guest with me today. Mike Cobb is on the podcast. Let me tell you about him real quick. He is the co-founder and the CEO of ECI Development. And more than 25 years, these guys have been building communities and helping people invest and live and retire. Now, I know this is where everybody's going to stop and say, Jerry, we've heard all of this before. There's real estate people come on all the time. No. Let me finish the sentence. Throughout Latin America, including places like Belize, Nicaragua, and Panama. And as many of you listeners know, I am an experienced real estate investor, have been for 30 years, have never gone outside. I mean, I got a hard and fast rule. I only invest in real estate I can touch. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with him because I've never talked to somebody, and you guys probably haven't either, who has invested outside of the country. So he's worked with thousands of investors and business owners, retirees and entrepreneurs who are looking for something different, whether that is lifestyle, international real estate, diversification, or simply another option outside of the United States. I wonder if price plays a part in that too. Be interesting to have that conversation. So before we get into all that though, let's start with the man behind the business here, Mike, and tell us about your background prior to heading, well, down south, as it turns out, and investing in real estate.
I always say down further south, right?
So, yeah, right.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you, Jerry. Good to be with you, and great intro. You know, you touched on the word Christ, and I'll just touch on that back here first. You know, I think even as a small child, I understood that I was called for some purpose. I didn't really understand what it was, and you know, and maybe I still don't, right? I think I do, but we never know for sure. So I think calling is important. I grew up in Northwest Pennsylvania. Went to college there. Right after college, I'd majored in political science, and I moved to the Washington, D.C. area, figuring that's probably where a poli-sci major should end up, but didn't really want to get into politics or be a lawyer. So I got into the computer business, and I was very, very fortunate. I got in on the PC side of things rather than the mainframes and minis. This is mid-'80s. And so got in on the right side of the personal computer business, right? It was ascending. It was revolutionary in so many ways, and did very, very well there for 12, almost 13 years. But somewhere along the way, the mid-'90s, I went on a little vacation with a buddy of mine down to Belize and just said, wow, this place is great. He was doing some work down there. And I said, next time you come back, let me know. And sure enough, a couple months later, hey, Cobbster, I'm headed down to Belize. You want to go with me? Yeah. And we made an offer on a couple condos. And what really was interesting was we made this offer on the condos. The developer said, look, if you can pay the full price, you're just going to shake your head. These were oceanfront condos for $100,000 each, right? I mean, just in Belize on Ambergris Key, it's insane. Anyway, but he said, look, if you just wire me the money, the full payment, you can get them for $80,000 each. We said, fine. So we wired him the money and bought a couple condos. And over the next 6, 7, 8 months, not even quite a year, but started going down quite a bit. And what we saw, Jerry, was we saw that the next building over and then the next and the next, there were 3 buildings kind of in various stages of construction. Nobody was ever working on them. Nothing was happening. And so one day we're just laying by the pool and the developer comes by. His name's Jim. And Jim, what's the deal? Why aren't you working on these buildings? And he tells us a story of woe. He was a Canadian guy. He moved down there, brought, I don't know, 3-4 million bucks, bought a piece of land, built some buildings, and he had to finance the sales, right? Because no bank up in Canada or in Nashville where you are, right, or Shepherdstown where I am, no bank up here is going to lend money on a condo in Belize, and no bank in Belize would lend a foreigner money. And so Jim in this case, but all the developers were providing their own financing. Somebody came along, wanted to buy a condo, they'd get as much down as they could, but they ended up being the bank. And it was killing them because they needed the money to keep building. They didn't want mortgage payments. They wanted the cash, right? And so that was the genesis of our very first business back in 1994 in Belize, was a mortgage company. And it really came out of seeing a need that was not being met. And we filled a hole in the marketplace. And I think that's what entrepreneurs do, right? Great entrepreneurs find a need in the marketplace. They find something that's being underserved or not served and create that solution. And that's what my business partner and I did back in 1994. It was our genesis into business in that part of the world.
So 30 years later, are you still in the mortgage business down there?
Yeah. So 10 years as a mortgage company. Then in 2003, we turned our mortgage company into a bank. We are an international offshore bank based in Belize. But at that point, it went from being sort of this, I'm going to call it mom and pop business, right, where we could handle the mortgage business ourselves, to a highly regulated banking business. And so we went out and we hired banking professionals. The bank still provides mortgages. That's our primary business to North Americans. But now we actually offer mortgages to North Americans, mostly US and Canadians, some Europeans, but all over the Caribbean, all over Latin America. So yeah, we're still in that business. I'm on the board. I'm on the management committee and credit committee and things like that. But we really have a team of people who are bankers who run the bank. So yeah, but it was an interesting place to start, right, and then move into other things over time.
So I'm going to ask you questions that I'm sure you have answered 500,000 times before, but for the new person who's hearing this for the first time, I have a rule about my real estate investing, and I don't invest in anything that I can't touch on a regular basis. So that's been my advice, and I've bought and sold and owned and managed hundreds of thousands of square feet. I have a 38 lot subdivision in Portland, Oregon right now, commercial, you name it, across the board over the years. I've been very active. I've bought and sold a dozen different businesses, and I never have an operating company that doesn't exist in a building that I own. I learned that really early on to put those two things together. And so for me, my investment strategy, such as it is, apparently is to make some money sometimes and lose some money other times, is to be able to touch it, generally speaking. So the idea of going to Belize scares the hell out of me. Why should I not be?
Well, let me ask, maybe I don't understand when you say you want to be able to touch it. Why can you touch something in Portland, Oregon, 38 unit development there, but not touch something in Belize? What's the feeling you have about to make that different? I'm curious what that is.
It's a great question. It's a development that I've owned for 9 years. As soon as I finish it up, all of that money will come. I have to go back to Portland 1 week a month. I have other business back there. And so because I can't pick up the dirt and move those 8 acres to Tennessee, I have to go back until I finish that out. But then it will all come back down here. It was all a product of me moving here. Yeah, in the middle of the project.
Got it. Okay. Yep. Well, much like you described going to Portland once a month, like I literally have up until the last couple of years, but literally for 30 years, I was in Belize once a month for 30 years, touching the business, right? And people, it's always your people. Everything is always people. And so, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a business leader, and I recognize myself as a business leader, not a business manager. And I think those two things are very, very different. And I like to say, on most days, I'm a pretty darn good leader. And on my best days, I'm a phenomenal leader. But on my best day, I am only a good manager. And most days, I'm a poor manager. And so I think one of the things that's really important for entrepreneurs to begin to understand is, what is their gifting, right? Some entrepreneurs are managers, right? And if you're a great manager, then you probably need leadership in your organization. It could be a rainmaker or something like that. Leaders tend to be, rainmakers too, right? Out on there telling the story, getting the business coming in. If you're a great manager, you probably need leadership in your organization. If you're a great leader, then you need management in your organization. And so, I do believe it's always your people. So when we went from a mortgage company to a bank, we went out and we recruited true banking professionals. And we were probably there a lot more in the first couple years. I mean, it might have been 10 days a month, right? I mean, that kind of thing. But as your team gets settled and they get to know the business and you get to know them, then it really morphs to where you're coming in to provide guidance, right? As a management committee, we have management meetings once a month. In fact, I have one tomorrow, but it's virtual. I don't have to go to Belize this month, right? Because it's a virtual meeting, but I'll be there next month, right? So anyway, I think that being able to touch the business means different things. And because we started as a remote company back in 1994, right, as a mortgage company, and then our development company, the real estate development company, started in 1996. And by the way, I moved myself and my family to Nicaragua in 2002 and lived there for 14 years, Jerry, because I do believe that physical presence is critically important, right? Until you've built that infrastructure, that human resource infrastructure, not physical stuff, but people stuff, right? You build out the human resource infrastructure, then you can back away. I don't think you have to be quite as touch on it. But I think touch is important, which is repeated visits. It's lots of phone time. Now it's a lot easier. Obviously, you can get on the video and you can see people, read body language, and take their temperature, so to speak. Whereas in the past, you had to physically be there really to do that. I'm not sure I answered your question. I chased a rabbit around the field, Jerry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
No. I think that's a great. Let's break the question into half of it. I think from an investment perspective, for somebody that's looking to build out and do the things more along those lines, I think that answers the question perfectly. Let's answer the question for just again, I'm going to use this word. Everyone knows how I feel about it. The passive investor that's looking for an investment in real estate. Maybe he's going to go to Belize so that he can go down there 1 or 2 times a year for his family for a vacation. And the rest of the time he's going to rent it out. Or maybe it's just a full-time investment property relative to buying something here in the United States. So just, Mom, Joe Blow Smith that's looking to invest. Why would they go to Belize over something right here in the States?
No, thank you, Jerry. Great question. I think there's kind of 2 answers, right? Let me hit the first one because I think it's the far more important answer. I believe that diversification is important. I believe that having some of your eggs in a different basket make sense from a prudence standpoint, right? If all of our eggs are in the U.S. basket, let's assume that most of your listeners are U.S. or Canadian, but in your home country, right? If all of your eggs are in your home country basket, there's risk there, right? Because I would never bet against the U.S. economy ever. I think the U.S. economy is strong. It's whatever $30 trillion economy. It's cranking. It's going to keep cranking, and it's not going to end, right? I mean, maybe, I don't know. It's hard to predict the future, right? But for the foreseeable future, the U.S. economy is just a strong workhorse. It's got flywheel momentum. It's going to just keep chugging along. So I would never bet against it. But I also understand that prudence would dictate having some small part of our nest egg, some part of our investable assets outside our home country. I owned a condo in Canada for a long time. I've owned property in Belize, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. So I've kind of diversified across the Americas. I like having some of my assets outside my home country because when the U.S. gets in a recession, right? I mean, maybe it affects travel, maybe it affects people going to Belize or Costa Rica, maybe it doesn't, right? Or if U.S. inflation goes up, maybe the inflation rates there aren't as much, right? So I think there's again, having diversification just generally is prudent. I mean, if you look at it from a U.S. perspective, they always say have stocks, bonds, cash, invest your stocks in diversified portfolios, blah, blah, blah. They say that for a reason because the standard portfolio theory talks about diversification as being critically important. I just think that the international element, and when it comes to real estate investors like we are, right, and your listeners are, then looking at something outside the U.S. with a small piece of your portfolio probably makes sense. But again, that's an individual choice, right?
Is this a strategy then for experienced real estate investors and not somebody right out the gate that's looking to invest for the first time?
I would say, just round numbers. If you're just coming out of the gates, you've never done it before, I would stay close to home, like you said, be able to touch it. And I say close to home, I'm in your neighborhood, right, or in your city, right, and I'm your neighborhood, but in your city, right, because I think you're going to make mistakes as a first-time real estate investor. You will make mistakes, and I think you want to make them where you can recover quickly, where the home turf. In fact, I wrote a book, and it's called How to Buy Your Home Overseas. And what the book really talks about is when we go outside our home turf. And I actually think that even inside the United States, you've got turf, right? I mean, some you're doing business in Nashville would be very different than doing business in California, right? Different regulatory
Oregon,
environment.
where I'm from, Oregon. They're different countries. They're not even the same country.
Yeah, right. So
even when I moved 6 years ago, when I moved to Nashville, the thing I have said every year since is I can't believe that the state and city, Portland, Oregon, that I grew up in is the same country. And I've traveled the world, and I don't live in the same country as I do when I go to the West Coast.
Well, there you go. And I think that's a perfect example, right? So even inside the United States, which is one country, you've got different countries. I like that. I think that's true. Or you got different countries. And so, when you go to a place that's not home turf, right? I think we have to approach it. And this is what my book talks about. We have to approach it with humility, right? We don't know what we don't know. And we also have to forget what we think we know, right? Assumptions help us because it lets us shortcut things. Well, we kind of know what's going on. But when you go someplace new, maybe you know it, maybe you don't. So some assumptions will work, some won't. The problem is when we go overseas, I think it's far more complex, right? We're definitely in more of we don't know what we don't know, and less of our assumptions are valid. And so we have to be more careful. We have to be more humble. And I think that's really the core crux of my book. And it probably applies, to anybody going outside their home turf here too, right? Like, be humble. Be humble. Ask questions. Ask the dumbest questions. There are no dumb questions, right? But approach it with humility, and you'll save yourself from humiliation, right? And cost money.
A couple of things there. I'll just because my listeners and so many of the people.
I like that. Yeah,
that's what I always say. Yeah. Don't be too dumb. Don't be too dumb to ask questions. And also, for the entrepreneurs, everyone knows, any experienced entrepreneurs know that assumption is, you're just not going to get anywhere making assumptions. I can't tell you how many times I've blown up every assumption I have. I'll tell you a story real quick. I'm in the sauna at the gym. A guy walks in. Clearly, he's Eastern European. I'm 6'4" and 225 pounds, and he was bigger than I am. And we start talking about college. It was the conversation in the sauna. And he jumps in and was kind of jumping down my throat a little bit. I never met this guy before, so I give it back to him. We go back. Turns out we see the world the same way. I'm walking out the gym. He's standing by the door as I'm walking out an hour or so later. And I said to him, "Hey, man, where's that accent from?" And he said he was from Croatia. And I said, "Okay, that's interesting. Tell me something I don't know about Croatia." And he said, "You got to go." I said, "I got to go." He's like, "It's cheap. It's beautiful. The rivers, the infrastructure's great. The people are going to love you. It's fantastic." I said, "I'm a Gen Xer. The only thing I know about Croatia is war, bombing, ethnic cleansing, movies throughout the 80s and 90s. In my head, I see nothing but war-torn." He's like, "Jerry, that's 20 years ago." And so to your point, in my head, and this leads into a question, believe it or not, I have this idea of, the Caribbean from a real estate investor perspective, every year getting blown over sideways by hurricanes, right? And if, as all things Latin America, when America gets a cough, right, gets a cold, other parts of the world, Latin America in particular, gets the flu. So from that perspective, humbly, right? Tell me what I don't understand about that, because to your point, that's my preconceived notions, just like my idea of Croatia today.
Yeah, sure. By the way, 3 days ago, I was in Croatia.
Is it true then?
It's beautiful. It's inexpensive. We flew in and out of Zagreb because we did a biking tour with our family. We do a biking holiday every summer in Slovenia, but we used Croatia, Zagreb as our in and out port of entry. So anyway, yeah, beautiful, inexpensive. Go to Zagreb. It's a spectacular city.
So what are the chances? What are the chances that you come on the podcast today? I tell you that story, and 3 days later, or you were there 3 days. It's a crazy world we live in. So
it is.
One second, just to expand on that a little bit. He gave it to me. He was a cop there forever, neat guy, and he said it's safe. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay,
you can walk the streets any hour of the day or night. Yep,
I'm going. Very good. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go. Okay, but coming back to your question, look, you talk about hurricanes, but we never have hurricanes in the U.S., so I guess I'm being facetious, of course. We have lots of hurricanes in the U.S., right? And the thing about hurricanes is the type of construction. I have a whole chapter in my book dedicated to earthquakes and hurricanes, because if you're on the Pacific coast, Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua, that Pacific coast of Central America, you've got earthquakes, same as California, right? If you're on the Caribbean side, you've got hurricanes, the same as Miami and Florida and Louisiana and everywhere else, right? And so the mitigation of risk is in the construction itself. If you're on the hurricane side, use the right materials, use strapping, get Cat 4, Cat 5 windows, whatever it might be. If you're on the Pacific side, build to the California or Japanese. They use the Japanese code because it's actually stronger than the California code. But anyway, use the Japanese or California construction code for seismic, right? And the book I talk about this. I don't want to talk about the book too much, but like it's really important that you validate with your own independent professionals, engineers in this case. So you validate, you hire your own independent engineer to oversee the construction of your home. Or if you're buying an existing home, hire an engineer to go in and make sure that it meets seismic or meets, the hurricane standards. Miami-Dade is usually what they use. So I think those are great ways to mitigate the risk of natural disaster. Will they have them? Sure. I mean, everywhere gets natural disasters, right? So I think that's the answer to the question. It's in the risk mitigation of the event that will happen. You will have hurricanes, you will have earthquakes, just like U.S., West Coast, East Coast. But mitigate through proper engineering and then validation of that engineering by an independent third party that works for you.
Let's talk about regulations in the United States. We talked about two different countries or multiple different countries. And one of the things down here, as I talk to my real estate investor and builder friends here, is that here in Nashville, where I am just south of Nashville, that they complain about it takes a month or two to get this approval or to get that permit or, to get this work approved. And I said, did y'all say months? I'm from Portland, Oregon. Right? Hey, everybody, quick break. I want to tell you about something I'm doing for the first time. I'm putting together the first Kronos Group cohort. That's 10 business owners max. And understand, this is not a course. It's a peer-level work with other operators and direct access to me on a month-to-month basis. We're going to go deep on what actually moves the needle for businesses, like systems and sales and leadership and staying sane while you're building something real, fitness, health, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. This group is for you. The people who get in on this first cohort get founder pricing, and that's the trade for going first. And it won't be open long, and it's not going to stay at this price for sure. If you've been listening to this show or me and thinking you need a room like this, you probably do. 10 spots, founder special. Check it out. The link's in the show notes. I'm from years and multiples of years. I just now broke ground on a 38 lot subdivision I've been working on for 9 years. Right. Yeah. I had to sue the county and the city 3 times and then they acquiesce and come back and do what they're supposed to. Anyway, the red tape, the lethargy in government, the inability to get them to move. They're still on COVID hours in Portland and in the counties, right? Meaning that they're not there 3 days a week. They never answer emails. All that. Forget about the regulations. They make half of it up. And if we don't do what they want, they move us to the bottom of the pile. And all of those things that we have to deal with regulation wise is a nightmare. So, and I think the United States generally is getting worse every single year, regardless of where you are. So Nashville's going to get worse, the same as Portland's going to just continue to get worse. So in that context, from a development perspective or a building perspective, what's it like down in South America?
It's probably somewhere in between, months in Nashville to years in Oregon, California. Our experience has been that, we follow the process. Look, in 33 years of doing business in Central America, we have never paid a bribe, right? 33 years, which is pretty unheard of for most organizations. I don't believe in paying bribes for three reasons, right? One is the practical reason. Once you pay a bribe, you should just put a big dollar sign on your forehead because you're going to pay forever, right? So that's the practical reason. There's the legal reason. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act says that if you, an American, make a bribe overseas, you can go to jail in the United States. So there's a legal reason. There's a practical reason, a legal reason. But then there's a moral reason. Corruption keeps countries poor. And it corrupts two people: corruption of the person giving the money and the person taking the money. And I am not willing to be corrupted. I'm not judgmental about other people, but I'm not willing to be corrupted because the corruption keeps countries poor. There's some great books about that. Hernando Soto wrote a book called The Mystery of Capital, and Lawrence Harrison wrote several books, The Central Liberal Truth and The Pan American Dream. These books really dig into corruption and what it does to societies to keep them very, very poor, and the poor people poor. The rich people get the money, right? But the poor people stay poor. And part of, coming back to the very beginning, part of why I've been doing what I've been doing overseas fulfills the calling, because we've created sustainable businesses. We've created businesses that if I get hit by a bus this afternoon, like, our business is going to go on. The jobs we've created will continue on because we've created, small towns and resort communities that don't need me anymore. Now, maybe they need me to continue to grow faster, but they'll grow on their own organically at this point too. But for me to pay a bribe really goes counter 180 degrees to my mission, my calling, which is to, leave the woodpile a little higher in these countries. And we are. And so, coming back to the permitting question, the first couple times you try to permit and you're not paying bribes, it will actually take a lot longer. It might take 6 months, 8 months, a year to get through a permitting process because, you're going to go to the bottom of the stack. You can be persistent, be nice, and we are. But what happens later, and this has been our strategy and it's working really, really well, is we do a ton of corporate social responsibility. We work with Rotary clubs, Operation Smile, Chair the Love. It's a wheelchair group. And we do these events, and we build clinics, and we donate ambulances, and we donate 280 wheelchairs and a container of wheelchairs. The mayor comes, the minister of this comes, whatever, and they get all the credit. We don't want any of the credit. We show up, we kind of help a little bit, we get the party started, so to speak, and then we go away and they get to hang out and celebrate with their constituents this wonderful thing that's happened in their community. And once we've done that a couple times, then when somebody in the environmental department or the building commission or someplace decides they're going to wait for a little bit of this, we can get on the phone. We can call the mayor. We can call the vice mayor. We can call the minister and say, hey, we need your help. We got somebody down at the building commission that just keeps throwing our stuff to the bottom. Can you go down there and just let them know that we're really good people? We do a lot of great stuff in the country. We pay our taxes. We do these corporate social responsibility things. We promote the country. Can you just get them to just get this thing through? We're not asking for any favor. Just get it off the bottom of the stack. And because we've done those things for the mayor, vice mayor, for the minister, and for the country, we tend to get permitting fairly quickly. But the first couple times in a new jurisdiction, it will take longer. It could take a year, maybe even 18 months on the outside. But once we're in and they know us and we know them and the relationship's there, the trust, right? The trust is there because it's been proven. I guess that makes it not trust anymore, but whatever. We can get permitting done in 3-4 months on something reasonable. A giant project takes longer because there's a lot more involved. But if we wanted to roll out a 38 unit, piece on our Grand Pacifica community, which is our Nicaragua, we want to take down a 38 lot new village or a new neighborhood. 4, 5, 6 months, we'd have that done.
So you talked about taxes. Actually, no, I'm going to come back to that. Taxes and security. Let me come back to that. You made a good point that I want to follow up to for all the entrepreneurs listening and people that are managing or want to get into management when it comes to businesses. And something that Michael just said, I want to reiterate. Everyone has heard me say this before. Michael, my management strategy has always been to teach. I've had 10,000 employees, and over that time, I've taught my managers that a good manager gets an employee to do what he wants him to do, but lets him think it's his idea.
Absolutely.
A good entrepreneur, give all the glory to someone else. You don't need it. If your mindset is right as an entrepreneur or as a manager, you don't need the accolades. Even if it was your idea, even if you brought it to fruition, let them bask in that. As long as they're doing what you want them to do, even how they get to the end might be different than how you would do it. But let them think it was their idea. And that is a bit of a superpower, I think, just to follow up on that thought.
But by the way, I fully agree. And I also think the corollary to that is if it turns out that it's a bad idea, own 100% of it. Right?
Buy it.
Own 100% of every bad idea. Give 100% of the credit of every good idea to somebody else.
That's right. I love it.
Yeah.
So you talked about taxes. So taxes generally, security more generally, right? Again, third world country, essentially. You're going down there. What's that like to people who haven't traveled to some of these places? I think about like India. I hate India. I'll never go back. I went too many times. China, I loved, right? And they're right next door to each other. Yeah. They're very, very different from my perspective, as an example. And so in that context, you go to, I haven't been to Croatia, obviously, but obviously Europe and Western Europe in particular. And each one of those countries are different. So in that context, give us some idea. We know what life is like in the United States relative to the government, taxes, security, things like that. Tell us about it down there where you are investing.
Sure. Well, let me just hit, I lived in Nicaragua. I took my wife and 2-year-old daughter. We moved down there in 2002. And we thought, Jerry, we would live there for, 2, 3, 4 years till we got our team built, right? And about, 3.5, 4 years into it, we'd hired a chief operating officer. We had architects, engineers, accountants, marketing, sales, and we had the whole team, human resource team, built out. We'd already built our physical infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, underground utilities, fiber optic cable. We were the first fiber to the home project in all of Latin America, right? This is back in 2004. So again, we put our human team together. We put our boots on the ground, our infrastructure in place. And my wife and I could have come home, and we went out to dinner one night, and we made a list, all the reasons to come back to where I am today, Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which this is the home we bought, 9 years ago now. Anyway, or stay in Nicaragua for a while longer. And we decided to stay in Nicaragua a while longer, and that was 14 years. We had another little daughter who came along. Both of my daughters were, really raised and grew up in Nicaragua, and it was a phenomenal place to raise children. In terms of safety, I always like to say, is Chicago a dangerous city? I don't know. I mean, it depends on what part of Chicago you're in, right? And so crime is generally geographic and behavioral, right? And a lot of times those two things can combine, right? And look, if you're out looking for dope at 4:00 in the morning, you're probably going to be in a bad neighborhood. And and something bad might happen to you. If you're home in bed at 10:00 at night in a nice residential neighborhood, probably nothing's happening to you. And in 14 years, nothing ever happened to my family. The flat tire, pull off to the side of the road, someone stops, helps to. I mean, my dad described it this way. He said, Nicaragua, and I'll use Nicaragua, but Costa Rica is the same. Panama is the same. Like, these countries are very similar. I didn't live in those other countries. I've spent a lot of time there, but never lived there. He said it was like the U.S. in the 50s. That was his description. He said, this is like the U.S. in the 50s. People help one another. My wife would take our daughters. I traveled. By the way, here's my biggest safety statistic. When I give presentations about living in the region, I talk about the stats, the crime stats, and they're low, and homicides per 100,000 is like 8 or something in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. So it's low, right? And I mean, I can't remember, like some of the cities in the US are 20 and 30, right? I mean, it's insane. But I say, but forget the stats. Here's my safety statistic. I show a picture of my family at the beach, and I say, I left my wife, my blonde wife, and 2 tow-headed girls in Nicaragua 2 to 3 weeks a month to travel to Belize, to travel to Panama, to travel back to the US, to travel to conferences, right? I left my family in Nicaragua by themselves 2 to 3 weeks a month. And if you have kids, right, you would never put your kids in danger. So my safety statistic is my behavior. I left them there because I knew they would be safe.
How about from an investment perspective, then, again, the United States, depending on where you are, there are some very good taxes and tax states and tax municipalities, and there are obviously some very bad ones. So in that context, from an investment perspective, what is it like down Belize or Costa Rica or Nicaragua?
A lot of things you want to set up, tax smart, right? And so, look, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're going to pay tax on your worldwide income no matter what. So I start with that. First, if you're U.S., you're going to pay U.S. taxes. But a lot of these countries, in fact, all the countries we work in, have tax treaties. So whatever tax you pay in these countries, you get to offset against your U.S. taxes. So you're not double taxed. And they all have lower taxes than the U.S. So in every single case, whatever you pay overseas comes off your U.S. taxes. So you're net neutral. I guess maybe that's the best way to say it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're paying the same way. So there is not an environment like you have again on the West Coast, up in the Northeast here in the States, where they're trying to nickel and dime you out of every penny.
No, I mean, they do try to nickel and dime you because they need your tax money, right? They do. But the tax rates are much lower. And again, because you can offset those when you pay your U.S. taxes, it doesn't matter.
And what is the political environment there? And I ask in this context, I agree with you. I had just read a couple of weeks ago that 95%, I think, was the number. It was very high. I think it was 95% of all violent crime, including murders in the United States, happens in 3 zip codes, or it happens in 3% of the counties in the country.
Yeah.
Right. To your point. But then I look at Portland, Oregon, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and you're not safe anywhere because there is a lack of law and order due to the lack of political leadership. And so it has bled over into all of those nice Tony parts of town. Anybody who looks at, Beverly Hills and seen those, ransacking stores and things of that nature. So what's from that perspective, from an investment perspective relative to safety, if I'm going to invest in real estate, what's the political climate like vis-a-vis Nashville or Tennessee versus Oregon or California or Washington?
What a great question, and what a wonderful way to set it up, because you're right. We have these, these very big differences. We talked about it in terms of, permitting, but also in terms of lifestyle and crime and safety and rule of law. I think that's really what it fundamentally is, right? Rule of law, or lack of. In Central America, I'm going to leave the Caribbean out because it's extremely varied. But if you look at, say, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, so those 4 countries of Central America, what you really have is an extremely conservative Catholic culture that is conservative. I don't know how else to say it. Let me just call it. I think a lot of times in the U.S. we think politically conservative, and I don't mean that, right? Conservative in the sense of, like, we're going to follow tradition. We're going to do the right thing. That's kind of what I mean by conservative, not politically conservative, right? And so you've got these cultures that value family, that value relationships, that value doing the right thing. And then you have a legal system that sits on top of that, right? Legal is just paper, it's law, and policemen to enforce it, and jails to put people in, right? But at the end of the day, it's the culture that creates the order, right?
Sure.
And if you have to use the police and the jails to impose, like, that's a whole different thing. And what I found living there and working there for so many years is that the culture is rule of law, law abiding. Maybe I'm not sure. It's a great question. I've never really discussed this before, so thank you. It's a good one. But like the culture itself is a rule of law culture, conservative rule of law culture. And so you don't have this imposition. It's there. I mean, you have police, you have jails, right? You have court systems, right? But it's not litigious, right? In the US, everybody's suing everybody for everything. They're burning stores. Like that it just doesn't happen down there, because people would go, "What are you thinking?" Like the first guy that said, "Hey, let's go break the windows and set the store on fire," like his buddies would go, "What are you thinking, man?" So it's different.
Like the United States from 20 years ago, even. Not even, you don't even have to go back to the 50s before you're questioning why you go break windows.
There you go. Okay, so yeah, good point. Yeah, right.
So it's because it's largely Catholic, almost entirely, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's heavily Catholic, and so the family dynamic plays a huge part in that. And then I'm assuming some of this, there's been just an abdication by some of these local governments of their responsibilities to protect those that follow the law. And it seems like they spend more time trying to protect those that break the law. And
not
you
happening.
haven't seen any of that down there yet.
Not happening.
Yeah.
And again, you've got this deeply entrenched culture that it's not that it couldn't happen, it couldn't change. Maybe it will, but it's a long way off. It's a long way off.
Well, I've often said if I'm on a ship, I ask this question all the time. If you're on a ship and the ship is sinking and there's two islands and you can only get to one and you got to live on either one, but you got to pick, and one is a secular island and one is a Christian island, I know which one I'm going to, and I don't know anybody else that's not going to the Christian island if you're being reasonable about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Even the atheists are going to the Christian island.
That's what I mean. If you're reasonable about it, nobody's going to the secular island. Everybody's going to the Christian island. Yeah,
that's right.
In that context, yeah, I don't. I see that. That's in many ways. Then it sounds like it's easy as Americans, particularly if you have never been abroad, for two things. Number one, to think that it just doesn't get any better than here, and there's nowhere else that's better than here.
But time out. I agree with that statement. There is no better place.
Well, let me finish there's no better place.
Yeah.
And then there's people who have been around the world and can say that there is no better place than the United States of America if you've seen any parts of the rest of the world. So there is a dynamic, though, inside of that you go, there are great things about America, but it doesn't mean there aren't great things about other places. And I take full responsibility for me. Look, when you said Panama, I think Noriega, right? When you say El Salvador, I think war, right? Sure. I mean, because I'm an idiot American that's raised as a Gen Xer. And these are the things that have gone on in my life. I think Nicaragua, of course. I think what was the strong man down
Ortega.
There for Ortega.
Yeah.
And so all of these, and so just in my mind, even though I've traveled the world, in my mind, I dismiss all of these places as being third world hellholes that I don't want anything to do with. You would think I would learn from my Croatia experience, but of course that's only been 2 weeks, so give me a minute to catch up.
You will. Hey, look, and what we always talk about with folks who are looking to do this. Look, a lot of people have already made the decision they're going to do it, and then they're just following. They're coming to visit. They're going down a path of eventually owning and living or whatever, or investing. Some people invest and never live, right? They just have it as an investment property. And so we have people that kind of already in that process. When we do podcasts like this or talking with folks that aren't quote unquote on the path at all, right? Maybe the first time they're hearing about it and they're probably scratching their head thinking like, what's this guy talking about? Right. By the way, I totally agree with you. There is no better country than the US. I would never trade my US passport for any other passport in the world ever. But just like I think there's no better food in the world than pizza, I want to have a hamburger once in a while, right? Just go whatever.
Right. I agree with you on that. Yeah, I'm not going to, no argument here.
Yeah. So Anyway, I think that comes back to that idea of diversification. The other thing that people kind of maybe the misinterpreting is that, that you got to have a lot of money to do something offshore. 29 years ago now, I said 28, but it's now 29 years ago, I planted 100 acres of teak trees in Panama, right? And I simply said to myself, 25 years from now, I'm going to have to figure out what to do with them, right? And we hired a professional management company, a forestry management company. By the way, the same company for the last 29 years has been taking care of my plantation, right? So again, continuity of people and that kind of stuff. But I now have trees that are being harvested. We built a sawmill a couple of years ago, or started a couple of years ago. It's up and running now. And we are producing cutting boards and lumber for export to the US out of our teak that we planted, 100 acres of teak. We've since continued to plant more. And folks can own a teak parcel, a quarter acre of teak. They own the land, fee simple title. You own the trees for like under 10 grand, like 9,800 or something. I forget. Anyway, but I'm just saying, like, you don't have to be a gazillionaire to have an overseas offshore investment. Like for 10 grand, you can own a quarter acre of, teak forested land in Panama. And the life cycle is long. It's a tree. It takes 25 years to grow, but in 25 years, like, it's actually going to produce a very, very nice return. And so that's why I did it. And that's why other folks are doing it. But you don't have to be gazillionaire to do it. You can take a small bite. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people don't really think. They're looking at condos in Cabo for 0.6 million. Yeah, okay. Well, if you got extra money laying around, go buy one, right? But not everybody does. In fact, most people don't, right? So how do you do it? Bite size,
Yeah, you kind of dovetailed into my next question, which was from an investment perspective then, and returns on that investment in real estate down in that part of the world. Is the investment building and developing and selling, or is it building and holding and renting? What's the investment, and how has the returns been over 30 years?
Yeah, look, I think there's two different kinds of people. We were joking before we went live about mailbox money. Show me somebody who's truly a passive investor that doesn't do anything, right? I think all of us in the real estate space that have done it understand there is no such thing as passive, right? It's not a job. We don't have to go there every day and work 8 hours to collect a paycheck, right? So it's passive in that sense by comparison, but it's not passive. Look, if somebody's looking to build a business down there, go buy a piece of property, do development, right? I think there's a lot more due diligence on the front end, a lot more planning that needs to come in. I actually do consulting. I have a development consulting business. I help people do that because I want more North Americans to come down and build wonderful places for North Americans to come retire, invest, digital nomads, whatever it is, right? The market's wide open. It does not compete with my development business, right? My ECI development business. I'm a firm believer that, when you have the Wendy's on one corner, it does great. When you put the McDonald's, the KFC, and the Burger King on the other three corners, all four of those stores do 5 times the business than that Wendy's originally did, right? And so the more people that come down and do development, the better it is for all of us, including me, who's already there. So, so we encourage it. In fact, like I said, I have a consulting company. I help people do this, right? If somebody says, look, I got a few $1 million, I want to come down, buy a piece of land, I want to build some houses, build condos, whatever it is they want to do, build a business. Yeah, I think there's incredible opportunity there. Jerry, the developing world, not just Latin America, it could be Asia, it could be Africa, whatever, but my world is Central and South America and the Caribbean, right? The developing world generally is a time machine, right? Just like my dad said, man, this is like the US in the 50s, right? I'm gonna lay one out right now. If I could clone myself, I can't, but if I could clone myself, I would open the Dairy Queen franchise in Panama, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. That's exactly what I do. I would go to Dairy Queen, I would get the franchise, and I would become the Dairy Queener of those 3 countries. Now, that's a lot of work. You got to go, you got to figure out how to do it. You got to do it. You got to train people. Like, I can't clone myself. But if I could, that's exactly what I would do. That's a business opportunity. Other people say, you know what? I just want to buy a condo. I want to buy a home. I want to, go down and play in it a couple weeks a year, and I want to rent it the rest of the time. That's a great business model too. That's far more passive, right? Because you don't have to be so active on it. And so those are probably maybe the two ends of the spectrum, with the exception of the teak, which is basically buy it and forget it, right? And we have people actually who are older who buy it in the name of their kid or in the name of their grandkids. So now you're just taking it, you're putting it down a generation or two generations, and in 25 years, they get the windfall, right? So that one's probably the most passive because you don't really have to do anything. So
on the real estate front, who is your main customers? Who's buying the real estate once it's
US,
built? Who?
US
U.S.
and
primarily?
Canadians. US,
Okay.
Canadians. Yeah.
Okay. Not a lot of
Yep.
local.
It's interesting. At our Grand Pacifica community, I think 22, almost 23% of our owners are local. So we do get a lot of local buy-in, but as a percentage, that's still only 1/5, right?
Right. What's the building? What's the real estate costs relative to somewhere here in the States? And then on top of that, what do you, if you know off the top of your head, a building cost number for, building at scale, say, one of
Yep.
your communities? What's the per
Sure.
square cost?
So the real estate is usually substantially less. Oceanfront, whatever, half, 3/4 of an acre on the Pacific Ocean for, $300,000. I mean, in Oregon, California, just times 10, right? I mean, $3 million or something. I don't know. Anyway,
Right.
Big difference, right? And so the land cost is significantly less. The one myth that I always like to bust is that, it's going to be so much cheaper to build down there, right? And labor is less. That's true. Labor is only about 1/3 of the cost generally of building a home, right? 2/3 is your materials. Materials are world price: concrete, steel, windows, copper. I mean, door handles, faucets, whatever. All that stuff is world price. There's no discount on any of that stuff in Central America, Latin America, or anywhere. And so while your labor is maybe 1/4 of what it would be in the States, which is probably about right, it only represents 1/3 of the cost of the building. So your cost to build is maybe 10% less, 15% less, which doesn't seem right, because you say, wait a minute, it's Nicaragua, it's Panama, whatever. But the construction itself is almost all world priced stuff. But your land is certainly
the real estate combined with a little bit of savings on the employee side, on the worker side, is really where the savings is.
But your cost of ownership once you own it is dramatically less. Condo fees, 1/4 of what they are. Taxes, whatever, half of what they are in the US. But then if you want to have a gardener, a maid, right? If you're living there, right? You want a gardener, you want a maid. I mean, that could be, $300 a month, $400 a month. So all of a sudden you have this incredible quality of life enhancement and cost of living, adjustment way down. So that's really why people do it.
You mentioned in the last few minutes we have left, I want to go back. You mentioned, I wrote a note down. You said your calling. I want to come back to that calling. When you were young, you felt that you had this calling. Maybe not specifically, if I understood you correctly, for real estate, but a calling to do something. Let's flesh that out a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, when I was in the computer business for 12, almost 13 years, and I remember praying and being like, God, like, why do you have me selling computers, personal computers around the Beltway? Like, how does this serve your purpose, right? And the answer I kind of got back was, shut up, keep your head down, and keep working. It's like, okay, I mean, whatever. I mean, whatever. I really didn't get an answer, right? But no answer meant just stay the course, right? Then when I started working in Central America and part-time for a few years, from maybe 94 to 98, and then 98 full-time on, what really quickly became apparent was the lessons I learned in the PC business, the personal computer business, were incredibly valuable lessons, because the personal computer business, when I entered it in 1986, got out of it in 98, the margins went from 15, 20% down to 3, 4, 5%. And so running a business where your gross margin is, say 3, 4%, right? I mean, like you want to talk about running efficient operations, like that's it has to be efficient, or And so the lessons I learned there were lessons that became very, very valuable in what I'm doing in Central America. And so to be able to build businesses there that will last long beyond my lifetime and continue to create employment. Look, I think sometimes I went to an English speaking church when I lived in Nicaragua, and I remember that every Sunday there was a core congregation of 50, 60, something like that. But every Sunday there'd be either, maybe no buses, but 1, 2, 3 buses, school buses, or 15 school buses. And so the church would swell to, anywhere from, 80 or 100 to 250, depending on the Sunday and how many people were there. And a few times somebody, just chit-chatting after service or before service. What are you here for? You're on the school bus. Yeah, what are you guys doing? We're planting a church. We're digging water wells. We're working in a community, whatever. And I remember a few times somebody said, yeah, well, what do you do? And I said, well, we're building a resort community. And I'll just say it like they go, really? Right? And I remember talking to one of my spiritual mentors, Doug's his name. I said, kind of bemoaning it a little bit. I'm like, what do these people come down here for a week? And, I'm living here, anyway, he said, Mike, there's a great book. I think the title, it's been a long time since I read, Business as a Calling. But basically what he says, Mike, your calling's business. Like, if people are hungry, if people are malnourished, and a lot of the people in our little neighborhood, they don't call it a county, but let me call it a county. The people in the county where we built our Grand Pacifica community, I mean, they were hungry, they were malnourished. And what Doug said to me, he says, look, you're creating employment, you're creating jobs, you're creating, food, you're creating health. And he said that, it's not that God can't come into people who don't have those, but when you have a full belly and you have a healthy, you have healthier people, it's an easier access to have the word received. And I, at that point, it was a powerful transition. It was early on. This might have been like 2005, 6, I don't remember, sometime in there. And I realized that I was now fulfilling the calling that I'd always understood I had, like not in any specific way, to a specific way. Like, this is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I am doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And at one point, if I can, I'll tell one minute story. I was diagnosed with lung cancer while I was living in Nicaragua, and it turned out to be a lung fungus. So, but in the meantime, I went for testing, and I remember getting the radiology report from a nuclear MRI thing, and the guy said, 90% malignant tumor. I went back to my hotel room. I was in Costa Rica getting it done, and I remember crying for a while. And then I kind of thought, like, what's my bucket list? I'm going to, I had never seen lava. So I'm like, I'm going to go see lava, hopefully, whatever. And then I kind of got past all that. And I said, okay, God, like, how do you want me to live my life? Right? Maybe I have another 6 months to live, whatever. It was a big blotch on my lung and whatever. And I heard clear as day, don't change a thing. You're doing exactly what I want you to do. And in that moment, there was incredible clarity. And, that is the mission. That is my mission, to do what I am doing and to continue doing what I'm doing until I'm given, different direction. So anyway, yeah.
I love that story. I love your answer to the calling, something that I think everybody can learn from. You've alluded a while ago in the podcast that you have a book. So let's brag on that for a second in the last minute or so that we got here.
Yeah, thank you. No, I don't tell that story very often because I don't think people really appreciate it. So thank you for asking. Really.
I don't think a lot of people on podcasts stop long enough. They, like I told you when we started, there's a set list of questions just in case I run out. Just so you know, I haven't looked at them and I don't know what any of them are. Perhaps some of my questions are in there, but this has been such a great conversation. But when somebody says something interesting, I don't want to be stuck on real estate. I want to ask you what you mean about calling. I wish more podcasters did stuff like that because it makes for much better conversation.
It really does. It's authentic. It's real. And I think we get to the heart of things, right? The real heart.
Yes.
By the way, that's my book right there. And there's a closer up of it, how to buy your home overseas and get it right the first time. It's on Amazon, but really it's how to do anything, make an investment overseas, even live overseas. If you said, I'm going to be a digital nomad and go overseas for, 6 months, this book is a great resource. and available on Amazon. So, go grab a copy.
How long, I always ask the authors, I've been trying to write a book, I don't know, 20 years. I have a very interesting background and a lot of experience, but how long did it take you? What was the experience like?
20 years like you, and then about 3 years of just, nose to the
Yeah.
grindstone, get her
Yeah.
done. So,
Yeah. Okay. I
yeah,
haven't got to that point yet, so I'll keep working on it. Michael, this has been absolutely fantastic, my friend. You are
yeah,
everything
Jerry.
I would hope you would be. Very, very informative. And again, I'm not, a newbie. I'm very steeped in the real estate game, but right here in the States, and I love hearing about other opportunities, having my mind opened up to it. And so you were the perfect guest for that. So I appreciate it, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.